Dolly Reads for You, with host Dolly Howard and her sidekick Colleen Kelly. Pull up a cushy seat, get comfy, and join us as we sail away into Bookland. You're listening to Wolf Spirit Radio.
And you are live. Damn it, hold on a minute. Okay, you are live.
Well, that was short and sweet.
Yeah, your intro's only... well, I hope it was your intro that I started.
Well, I think it was ended.
Maybe the outro?
No, it was sail away, but it was like 2 seconds.
Well, I'll fix it when I edit it.
Yeah, no problem.
Hi, everybody.
Colleen's having one of those days.
Oh, I am.
So we'll just go with the flow. Don't stress about it. There's been enough stress around today.
Oh, for sure. For a while now.
Poor Annette started using the F word with doctor's nurse.
Oh?
She got a little upset with her. Alrighty then, but then the nurse called me and Mom smoothed it over with the nurse, but not all the way smooth because I wanted the nurse to know she does tell stories. Not Annette, but the nurse.
Ooh.
Mm-hmm. So anyway, let's say hello to everybody.
Okie dokie.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. This is another Tuesday. It is April 26, 2016. You're listening to Dolly Reads for You. I'm Dolly, and the other voice you were hearing is Colleen. You want to say hi, Colleen?
Hi, Colleen.
It's gonna be one of those.
Hi, Dolly. And hi, everyone.
She got a little bit in a time warp today. I will tell you what we're reading in a minute. I want to do the card thing. I'm going to send the card to you all, and I'm going to think about it 3 times, and, okay, I thought of it 3 times. I'm going to give it a little while to travel from my head to yours.
Dolly, is it big or is it little?
It's little. It's in the lower, it's 2 to 10.
Oh, okay.
2 to 10. The number is between 2 and 10. I was thinking, is what big or little? I wasn't going to say it out loud.
Well, if I was talking to Annette, I would not have asked that question.
Coward.
Yep.
Is she still there? Yeah, it looks like she's still there. Okay, so is everybody ready? Drum roll. It is 6 of spades. Is Barb here? Do I need to explain? Nope, Barb's not here. So I thought 6 of spades. We'll wait for you to tell me. Did you get it? Did you not? Are you close? Are you far? And I will, at the break time, I will think of the next card because I don't want to send out conflicting messages to you. I want to mention, I decided, because you forget from one week to the next where we leave off in the book. So I decided I'm putting on the forum, a brief description of what I read each time. That way you can go to the forum for Dolly Reads for You and click in the topic the update on the shack now, because we're doing the shack now. So you can go in there and get caught up as to where we are before you come in for the day's current reading. And I thought, probably 10 people will look at that. Over 700 people have looked at that already, and I just put that sucker out there a couple days ago. Wow, I was blown away. So anyway, a whole bunch of you should be caught up to where we are now. We're reading The Shack, Where Tragedy Confronts Eternity by William Paul Young, and that's Y-O-U-N-G. And we have reached a place in chapter... Oh, wow, that's a long chapter. Where are we? Chapter 5. Guess Who's Coming to Dinner is the title of Chapter 5. And we're to the point where Matt got he got very emotional, and he laid on the floor and where the blood was on the floor from Missy, and he cried, and then he decided if God wanted him, God would have to come find him. So he reached into his pocket and took out the note he had found in his mailbox and tore it up, letting the pieces slowly sift through his fingers to be carried off by the cold wind that had kicked up. A weary old man, he stepped off the porch and with heavy footsteps and a heavier heart, started the hike back to the car. Poor guy, he's been through a lot. Hold on, I have to see what's being sent. Oh, okay. We're okay. All right, so he had barely walked 50 feet up the trail when he felt a sudden rush of warm air overtake him from behind. The chirping of a songbird broke the icy silence. The path in front of him rapidly lost its veneer of snow and ice, as if someone were blow drying it. Mac stopped and watched as all around him the white covering dissolved and was replaced by emerging and radiant growth. 3 weeks of spring unfurled before him in 30 seconds. He rubbed his eyes and steadied himself in the swirl of activity. Even the light snow that had begun to fall had changed to tiny blossoms lazily drifting to the ground. What he was seeing, of course, was not possible. The snowbanks had vanished, and summer wildflowers began to color the borders of the trail and the forest as far as he could see. Robins and finches darted after one another among the trees. Squirrels and chipmunks occasionally crossed the path ahead, some stopping to sit up and watch him for a moment before plunging back into the undergrowth. He even thought that he glimpsed a young buck emerging from a dark glade in the forest. But on the second look, it was gone. As if that weren't enough, the scent of blooms began to fill the air, not just the drifting aroma of wild mountain flowers, but the richness of roses and orchids and other exotic fragrances found in more tropical climates. Excuse me. Okay. Mac was no longer thinking about home. A terror gripped him, as if he had opened Pandora's box and was being swept away into the center of madness, to be lost forever. Unsteady, he carefully turned around, trying to hold on to some sense of sanity. He was stunned. Little, if anything, was the same. The dilapidated shack had been replaced by a sturdy and beautifully constructed log cabin, now standing directly between him and the lake, which he could see just above the rooftop. It was built out of hand-peeled, full-length logs, every one scribed for a perfect fit. Instead of the dark and forbidding overgrowth of brush, briars, and devil's club, Everything Mac could see was now postcard perfect. Smoke was lazily wending its way from the chimney into the late afternoon sky, a sign of activity inside. A walkway had been built too, and around the front porch bordered a small white picket fence. The sound of laughter was coming from nearby, maybe inside, but he wasn't sure. Perhaps this was what it was like to experience a complete psychotic breakdown. "I'm losing it," Mac whispered to himself. "This can't be happening. This isn't real." It was a place that Mac could have imagined only in his best dreams, and this made it all the more suspect. The sights were wondrous, the scents intoxicating, and his feet, as if they had a mind of their own, took him back down the walkway and up onto the front porch. Flowers bloomed everywhere, and the mix of floral fragrances and pungent herbs aroused hints of memories long forgotten. He had always heard that the nose was the best link to the past, that the olfactory sense was the strongest for tapping into forgotten history, and now some long-stored remembrances of his own childhood flittered through his mind. Once on the porch, he stopped again. Voices were clearly coming from inside. Mac rejected the sudden impulse to run away, as if he were some kid who had thrown his ball into a neighbor's flower garden. But if God is inside, it wouldn't do much good anyway, would it? He closed his eyes and shook his head to see if he could erase the hallucination and restore reality. But when he opened them, it was still there. He tentatively reached out and touched the wood railing. It certainly seemed real. He now faced another dilemma. What should you do when you come to the door of a house, or cabin in this case, where God might be? Should you knock? Presumably God already knew that Mac was there. Maybe he ought to simply walk in and introduce himself. But that seemed equally absurd. And how should he address him? Should he call him Father, or Almighty One, or perhaps Mr. God? And would it be best if he fell down and worshipped? Now that he was really in the mood. Not that he was really in the mood. Sorry, reading words that aren't there. As he tried to establish some inner mental balance, the anger that he thought had so recently died inside him began to emerge. No longer concerned or caring about what to call God, and energized by his ire, he walked up to the door. Mac decided to bang loudly and see what happened. But just as he raised his fist to do so, the door flew open, and he was looking directly into the face of a large, beaming African-American woman. Instinctively, he jumped back, but he was too slow. With speed that belied her size, she crossed the distance between them and engulfed him in her arms, lifting him clear off his feet and spinning him around like a little child. And all the while she was shouting his name, Mackenzie Allen Phillips, with the ardor of someone seeing a long-lost and deeply loved relative. She finally set him back on earth, and with her hands on his shoulders, pushed him back as if to get a good look at him. Mac, look at you! She fairly exploded. Here you are, and so grown up. I have really been looking forward to seeing you face to face. It is so wonderful to have you here with us. My, how I do love you. And with that, she wrapped herself around him again. Mac was speechless. In a few seconds, this woman had breached pretty much every social propriety behind which he had so safely entrenched himself. But something in the way she looked at him and yelled his name made him equally delighted to see her too, even though he didn't have a clue who she was. Just a minute, need a drink. Suddenly he was overwhelmed by the scent emanating from her, and it shook him. It was the smell of flowers, with overtones of gardenia and jasmine, unmistakably his mother's perfume that he kept hidden away in his little tin box. He had already been perched precariously on the precipice of emotion, and now the flooding scent and attendant memories staggered him. He could feel the warmth of tears beginning to gather behind his eyes, and if they were knocking on the door of his heart, it seemed that she saw them too. "It's okay, honey. You can let it all out. I know you've been hurt, and I know you're angry and confused. So go ahead and let it out. It does a soul good to let the waters run once in a while, the healing waters." But Mac could not stop the tears from filling his eyes. He was not ready to let go. Not yet. Not with this woman. With every effort he could muster, he kept himself from falling back into the black hole of his emotions. Meanwhile, this woman stood with her arms outstretched, as if they were the very arms of his mother. He felt the presence of love. It was warm, inviting, melting. "Not ready?" she responded. "That's okay. We'll do things on your terms and time. Well, come on in. Can I take your coat? And that gun? You don't really need that, do you? We wouldn't want anyone to get hurt, would we?" Mac wasn't sure what to do or what to say. Who was she, and how did she know? He was rooted to the spot where he stood, but slowly and mechanically took off his coat. The large black woman gathered his coat, and he handed her the gun, which she took from him with 2 fingers as if it was contaminated. Just as she turned to enter the cabin, a small, distinctly Asian woman emerged from behind her. "Here, let me take those," her voice sang. Obviously, she had not meant the coat or gun, but something else, and she was in front of him in a blink of an eye. He stiffened as if he felt some sweep. Oh, let me start that again. He stiffened as he felt something sweep gently across his cheek. Without moving, he looked down and could see that she was busy with a fragile crystal bottle and a small brush, like those he had seen Nan and Kate use for makeup, gently removing something from his face. Before he could ask, she smiled and whispered, "Mackenzie, we all have things we value enough to collect, don't we?" His little tin box flashed through his mind. "I collect tears." As she stepped back, Mac found him involuntarily squinting in her direction, as if doing so would allow his eyes to see her better. But strangely, he still had a difficult time focusing on her. She seemed almost to shimmer in the light, and her hair blew in all directions, even though there was hardly a breeze. It was almost easier to see her out of the corner of his eye than it was to look at her directly. He then glanced past her and noticed that a third person had emerged from the cabin. This one a man. He appeared Middle Eastern and was dressed like a laborer, complete with tool belt and gloves. He stood easily, leaning against the door jamb with arms crossed in front of him, wearing jeans covered in wood dust and a plaid shirt with sleeves rolled just above the elbows, revealing well-masculined forearms. His features were pleasant enough, but he was not particularly handsome. Not a man who would stick out in a crowd, but his eyes and smile lit up his face, and Mac found it difficult to look away. Mac stepped back again, feeling a bit overwhelmed. "Are there more of you?" he asked a little hoarsely. The 3 looked at one another and laughed. Mac couldn't help but smile. "No, Mackenzie," the black woman chuckled. "We is all that you get, and believe me, we're more than enough." Mac tried again to look at the Asian woman. This wiry-looking person appeared to be of northern Chinese or Nepalese or even Mongolian ethnicity. It was hard to tell, though, because his eyes had to work to see her at all. From her clothing, Mac assumed she was a groundskeeper or gardener. She had gloves folded into her belt, not the heavy leathers of the man, but the lightweight cloth and rubber ones that Mac himself used for yard work at home. She was dressed in plain jeans with ornamental designs at the fringes, knees covered in dirt from where she had been kneeling, and a brightly colored blouse with splashes of yellow and red and blue. But he knew all this as more of an impression of her than from actually seeing her, as she seemed to phase in and out of his vision. The man stepped in, touched Mac on the shoulder, gave him a kiss on both cheeks, and embraced him strongly. Mac knew instantly that he liked him. As they separated, the man stepped back, and the Asian lady moved toward him again, this time taking his face in both her hands. Gradually and intentionally, she moved her face closer to his, and just when he imagined she was going to kiss him, she stopped and looked deep into his eyes. Mac thought he could almost see through her. Then she smiled, and her scents seemed to wrap themselves around him and lift a huge weight off his shoulders, as if he had been carting his gear in a backpack. Mac suddenly felt lighter than air, almost as if he were no longer touching the ground. She was hugging him without hugging him, or really without even touching him. Only when she pulled back, which was probably just seconds later, did he realize that he was still standing on his feet, and that his feet were still touching the deck. "Oh, don't mind her," the big black woman laughed. "She has that effect on everyone." "I like it," he muttered, and all three burst into more laughter, and now Mac found himself laughing along with them, not knowing exactly why, and not really caring either. When they finally stopped giggling, the large woman put her arm around Mac's shoulders, drew him to her, and said, "Okay, we know who you are, but we should probably introduce ourselves to you. She waved her hands with a flourish, am the housekeeper and cook. You may call me Eloise." How do you say it?
I think Eloise is...
Eloisia? Elousia.
Yeah.
I'm going to call her Eloisia.
Good.
Okay, thanks. "Eloisia?" asked Mac, not comprehending at all. "Okay, you don't have to call me Eloisia. It's just a name I am rather fond of and has particular meaning to me." So she crossed her arms and put one hand under her chin, as if thinking especially hard. "You could call me what Nan does." "What? You don't mean..." Now Mac was surprised and even more confused. Surely this was not the Papa who sent the note. "I mean, are you saying Papa?" "Yes," she responded and smiled, waiting for him to speak as if he were about to say something, which he was not at all. "And I," interpreted the man, who looked to be in his 30s and stood a little shorter than Mac himself, "I try to keep things fixed up around here. I enjoy working with my hands, although, as these two will tell you, I take pleasure in cooking and gardening as much as they do." "You look as if you're from the Middle East, maybe Arab," Mac guessed. "Actually, I'm a stepbrother of that great family. I am Hebrew, to be exact, from the house of Judah." "Then..." Mac was suddenly staggered by his own realization. "Then you are Jesus." "Yes, and you may call me that if you like. After all, it has become my common name. My mother called me Yeshua, but I have also been known to respond to Joshua or even Jesse. Max stood dumbfounded and mute. What he was looking at and listening to simply would not compute. It was all so impossible. But here he was, or was he really here at all? Suddenly he felt faint. Emotion swept over him as his mind attempted desperately to catch up with all the information. Just as he was about to crumble to his knees, the Asian woman stepped closer and deflected his attention. And I am Sarayu, Sarayu, she said as she tilted her head in a slight bow and smiled. Keeper of the gardens, among other things. Thoughts tumbled over themselves as Max struggled to figure out what to do. Was one of these people God? What if they were hallucinations or angels, or God was coming later? That could be embarrassing. Since there were 3 of them, maybe this was a trinity sort of thing. But 2 women and a man and none of them white? Then again, why had he naturally assumed that God would be white? He knew his mind was rambling, so he focused on the one question he most wanted answered. Then Max struggled to ask, which one of you is God? I am, said all 3 in unison. Mac looked from one to the next, and even though he couldn't begin to grasp what he was seeing and hearing, he somehow believed them. We've reached chapter 6. A piece of pie. And they have it in the pie sign, the mathematical pie sign. No matter what God's power may be, the first aspect of God is never that of the absolute master, the Almighty. It is that of the God who puts himself on our human level and limits himself. And that was said by Jakes, Elul, Anarchy and Christianity. Well, Mackenzie, don't just stand there gawking with your mouth open like your pants are full, said the big black woman as she turned and headed across the deck, talking the whole time. Come and talk to me while I get supper on. Or if you don't want to do that, you can do whatever you want. Behind the cabin, she said, gesturing over the roof without looking or slowing down. You will find a fishing pole by the boat shed that you can use to catch some lake trout. She stopped at the door to give Jesus a kiss. Just remember, she said, turning to look back at Mac, you gotta clean what you catch. Then with a quick smile, she disappeared into the cabin, armed with Mac's winter coat and still carrying the gun by 2 fingers, a full arm's length away from her. Mac was standing there with his mouth indeed open and an expression of bewilderment plastered to his face. He hardly noticed when Jesus walked over and put an arm around his shoulder. Sarayu seemed to have just evaporated. Isn't she great? Exclaimed Jesus, grinning at Mac. Mac turned and faced him, shaking his head. Am I going crazy? Am I supposed to believe that God is a big black woman with a questionable sense of humor? Jesus laughed. She's a riot. You can always count on her to throw you a curve or 2. She loves surprises, and even though you might not think it, her timing is always perfect. Really? Said Max, still shaking his head and not sure if he really believed that. So now what am I supposed to do? You're not supposed to do anything. You're free to do whatever you like. Jesus paused and then continued, trying to help by giving Mac a few suggestions. I am working on a wood project in the shed. Sarayu is in the garden. Or you could go fishing, canoeing, or go in and talk to Papa. Well, I sort of feel obligated to go in and talk to him, her. Oh, now Jesus was serious. Don't go because you feel obligated. That won't get you any points around here. Go because it's what you want to do. Mac thought for a moment and decided that going into the cabin actually was what he wanted to do. He thanked Jesus, who smiled, turned, and headed off to his workshop, and Mac stepped across the deck and up to the door. Again he was alone, but after a quick look around, he carefully opened it. He stuck his head in, hesitated, and then decided to take the plunge. "God?" he called rather timidly and feeling more than a little foolish. "I'm in the kitchen, Mackenzie. Just follow my voice." He walked in and scanned the room. Could this even be the same place? He shuddered at the whisper of lurking dark thoughts and again locked them out. Across the room, a hallway disappeared at an angle. Glancing around the corner into the living room, his eyes searched out the spot near the fireplace. But there was no stain marring the wood surface. He noticed that the room was decorated tastefully with art that looked as if it had been either drawn or handcrafted by children. He wondered if this woman treasured each of these pieces, as any parent who loves her children would. Maybe that was how she valued anything that was given to her from the heart, the way children seem to give so easily. Mac followed her soft humming down a short hallway and into an open kitchen dining area, complete with a small 4-seat table and wicker-back chairs. The inside of the cabin was roomier than he had expected. Papa was working on something with her back to him, flower flying as she swayed to the music of whatever she was listening to. The song obviously came to an end, marked by a couple of last shoulder and hip shakes. Turning to face him, she took off the earphones. Suddenly, Mac wanted to ask 1,000 questions, or say 1,000 things, some of them unspeakable and terrible. He was sure that his face betrayed the emotions he was battling to control. And then in a flash of a second, he shoved everything back into his battered heart's closet, locking the door on the way out. If she knew his inner conflict, she showed nothing by her expression, still open, full of life, and inviting. He inquired, "May I ask what you're listening to?" "You really want to know?" "Sure." Now Mac was curious. "West Coast Juice, group called Diatribe, and an album that isn't even out yet called Heart Trips. Actually," she said, winking at Mac, "these kids haven't even been born yet." "Right," Mac responded, more than a little incredulous. "West Coast Juice, huh? It doesn't sound very religious." "Oh, trust me, it's not. More like Eurasian funk and blues with a message and a great beat." She sidestepped toward Mac as if she were doing a dance move and clapped. Mac stepped back. "So God listens to funk?" Mac had never heard funk talked about in any properly righteous terms. "I thought you would be listening to George Beverly Shea or the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. You know, something churchier." "Now see here, Mackenzie, you don't have to be looking out for me. I listen to everything, and not just to the music itself, but the hearts behind it. Don't you remember your seminary classes? These kids ain't saying anything I haven't heard before. They're just full of vinegar and fizz. Lots of anger, and I must say with some good reason, too. They're just some of my kids showing and spouting off. I am especially fond of those boys, you know. Yep, I'll be keeping my eye on 'em." Max struggled to keep up with her, to make some sense of what was happening. None of his old seminary training was helping in the least. He was at a sudden loss for words, and his million questions had all seemed to abandon him. So he stated the obvious. "You must know," he offered, "calling you Papa is a bit of a stretch for me." "Oh, really?" She looked at him in mock surprise. "Of course I know. I always know," she chuckled. "But tell me, why do you think it's hard for you? Is it because it's too familiar for you, or maybe because I am showing myself as a woman, a mother, or—" "No small issue there," Mac interrupted with an awkward chuckle. "Or maybe it's because of the failures of your own Papa." Uh-oh. That was my uh-oh, sorry. Mac gasped involuntarily. He wasn't used to having deep secrets surface so quickly and openly. Instantly, guilt and anger welled up, and he wanted to lash out with a sarcastic remark in response. Mac felt as if he were dangling over a bottomless chasm, and was afraid if he let any of it out, he would lose control of everything. He sought for safe footing, but was only partially successful, finally answering through gritted teeth. "Maybe it's because I've never known anyone I could really call Papa." At that point, she put down the mixing bowl that had been cradled in her arm, and leaving the wooden spoon in it, she turned toward Mac with tender eyes. She didn't have to say it. He knew she understood what was going on inside him, and somehow he knew she cared about him more than anyone ever had. "If you let me, Mac, I'll be the Papa you never had." The offer was at once inviting and at the same time repulsive. He had always wanted a Papa he could trust, but he wasn't sure he'd find it here, especially if this one couldn't even protect his Missy. A long silence hung between them. Mac was uncertain what to say, and she was in no hurry to let the moment pass easily. "If you couldn't take care of Missy, how can I trust you to take care of me?" There, he'd said it. The question that had tormented him every day of the great sadness. Mac felt his face flush angry red as he stared at what he now considered to be some odd characterization of God, and he realized his hands were knotted into fists. "Mac, I'm so sorry." Tears began to trail down her cheeks. "I know what a great gulf this has put between us. I know you don't understand this yet, but I am especially fond of Missy, and you too." He loved the way she said Missy's name, and yet he hated hearing it coming from her. It rolled off her tongue like the sweetest wine, and even through all the fury still raging in his mind, he somehow knew she meant it. He wanted to believe her, and slowly some of his rage began to subside. "That's why you're here, Mac," she continued. "I want to heal the wound that has grown inside you and between us." To gain some control, he turned his eyes toward the floor. It was a full minute before he had enough to whisper without looking up. I think I'd like that," he admitted, "but I don't see how." "Honey, there's no easy answer that will take your pain away. Believe me, if I had one, I'd use it now. I have no magic wand to wave over you and make it all better. Life takes a bit of time and a lot of relationship." Mac was glad they were stepping back from the edge of his ugly accusation. How near he had come to being totally overwhelmed by it had scared him. "I think it'd be easier to have this conversation if you weren't wearing a dress," he suggested, and attempted a smile as weak as it was. "If it were easier, then I wouldn't be," she said with a slight giggle. "I'm not trying to make this harder for either of us, but this is a good place to start. I often find that getting head issues out of the way first makes the heart stuff easier to work on later, when you're ready. She again picked up the wooden spoon, which was dripping with some sort of batter. Mackenzie, I am neither male nor female, even though both genders are derived from my nature. If I choose to appear to you as a man or a woman, it's because I love you. For me to appear to you as a woman and suggest that you call me Papa is simply to mix metaphors to help you keep from falling so easily back into your religious conditioning. She leaned forward as if to share a secret. To reveal myself to you as a very large white grandfather figure with flowing beard like Gandalf would simply reinforce your religious stereotypes. And this weekend is not about reinforcing your religious stereotypes. Mac almost laughed out loud and wanted to say, "You think? I'm over here barely believing that I'm not stark raving mad?" Instead, he focused on what she had just said and regained his composure. He believed in his head, at least, that God was spirit, neither male nor female. But in spite of that, he was embarrassed to admit to himself that all these visuals for God were very white and very male. She stopped talking, but only long enough to put some seasonings in a spice rack on a ledge by the window before turning to face him again. She looked at Mac intently. "Hasn't it always been a problem for you to embrace me as your father? And after what you've been through, you couldn't very well handle a father right now, could you?" He knew she was right, and he realized the kindness and compassion in what she was doing. Somehow, the way she had approached him had skirted his resistance to her love. It was strange and painful and maybe even a little bit wonderful. But then he paused, still focused on staying rational. "Why is there such an emphasis on you being a father? I mean, it seems to be the way you most reveal yourself." "Well," responded Papa, turning away from him and bustling around the kitchen, "there are many reasons for that, and some of them go very deep. Let me say for now that we knew once the creation was broken, true fathering would be much more lacking than mothering. Don't misunderstand me, both are needed, but an emphasis on fathering is necessary because of the enormity of its absence." Mac turned away a bit bewildered and feeling he was already in over his head. As he reflected, he looked through the window at a wild-looking garden. "You knew I would come, didn't you?" Mac finally spoke quietly. "Of course I did." She was busy again, her back to him. "Then was I free not to come? Did I not have a choice in the matter?" Papa turned back to face him, now with flour and dough in her hands. "Good question. How deep would you like to go?" She didn't wait for a response, knowing that Mac didn't have one. Instead, she asked, "Do you believe you are free to leave?" "I suppose I am." "Am I?" "Of course you are. I'm not interested in prisoners. You're free to walk out that door right now and go home to your empty house. Or you could go down to the grind and hang out with Willie. Just because I know you're too curious to go, does that reduce your freedom to leave?" She paused only briefly and then turned back to her task, talking to him over her shoulder. "Or if you want to go just a wee bit deeper, we could talk about the nature of freedom itself. Does freedom mean that you are allowed to do whatever you want to do? Or we could talk about all the limiting influences in your life that actively work against your freedom. Your family genetic heritage, your specific DNA, your metabolic uniqueness, the quantum stuff that is going on at a subatomic level where only I am the always present observer. or the intrusion of your soul's sickness that inhibits and binds you, or the social influences around you, or the habits that have created synaptic bonds and pathways in your brain. And then there's advertising, propaganda, and paradigms.
Paradigms.
Thank you, paradigms. Inside that confluence and multifaceted inhibitors, she said, sighing, what is freedom really? Mac just stood there, not knowing what to say. Only I can set you free, Mackenzie, but freedom can never be forced. I don't understand, replied Mac. I don't even understand what you just told me. She turned back and smiled. I know. I didn't tell you so that you would understand right now. I told you for later. At this point, you don't even comprehend that freedom is an incremental process. Gently reaching out, she took Mac's hands in hers, flower-covered and all, and looking him straight in the eyes, she continued, Mackenzie, the truth shall set you free, and the truth has a name. He's over in the workshop right now, covered in sawdust. Everything is about him, and freedom is a process that happens inside a relationship with him. Then all that stuff you feel churning around inside will start to work its way out. How can you really know how I feel? Mac asked, looking back into her eyes. Papa didn't answer, only looked down at their hands. His gaze followed hers, and for the first time, Mac noticed the scars on her wrists, like those he now assumed Jesus also had on his. She allowed him to tenderly touch the scars, outlines of a deep piercing, and he finally looked up again into her eyes. Tears were slowly making their way down her face, little pathways through the flour that dusted her cheeks. Don't ever think that way. Don't ever think that what my son chose to do didn't cost us dearly. Love always leaves a significant mark, she stated softly and gently. We were there together. Mac was surprised. At the cross? Now wait, I thought you left him. You know, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? It was a scripture that had often haunted Mac in the great sadness. You misunderstand the mystery there. Regardless of what he felt at that moment, I never left him. How can you say that? You abandoned him just like you abandoned me. Mackenzie, I never left him, and I have never left you. That makes no sense to me, he snapped. I know it doesn't, at least not yet. Will you at least consider this? When all you can see is your pain, perhaps then you lose sight of me. When Mac did not respond, she turned back to her cooking so as to offer him a little needed space. She seemed to be preparing a number of dishes all at once, adding various spices and ingredients. Humming a haunting little tune, she put the finishing touches on the pie she had been making and slid it into the oven. Don't forget the story didn't end in his sense of forsakenness. He found his way through it to put himself completely into my hands. Oh, what a moment that was. Mac leaned against the counter somewhat bewildered. His emotions and thoughts were all jumbled. Part of him wanted to believe everything Papa was saying. That would be nice. But another part was objecting rather loudly. This can't possibly be true. I understand that. Papa reached for the kitchen timer, gave it a little twist, and placed it on the table in front of them. I'm not who you think I am, Mackenzie. Her words weren't angry or defensive. Mac looked at her, looked at the timer, and sighed. I feel totally lost. Then let's see if we can find you in this mess. Almost as if on cue, a blue jay landed on the kitchen windowsill and began strutting back and forth. Papa reached into a tin on the counter and, sliding the window open, offered Mr. Jay a mixture of grains that she must have kept just for that purpose. Without any hesitation, and with a seeming air of humility and thankfulness, the bird walked straight to her hand and began feeding. "Consider our little friend here," she began. "Most birds were created to fly. Being grounded for them is a limitation within their ability to fly, not the other way around." She paused to let Mac think about her statement. "You, on the other hand, were created to be loved. So for you to live as if you were unloved is a limitation, not the other way around." Mac nodded his head, not so much in full agreement, but more as a signal that at least he understood and was tracking. That seemed simple enough. Living unloved is like clipping a bird's wings and removing its ability to fly. Not something I want for you. There's the rub. He didn't feel particularly loved at the moment. "Mac, pain has a way of clipping our wings and keeping us from being able to fly." She waited a moment, allowing her words to settle. "And if it's left unresolved for very long, you can almost forget that you were ever created to fly in the first place." Mac was silent. Strangely, the silence was not that uncomfortable. Mac looked at the little bird. The bird looked back at Mac. He wondered if it was possible for birds to smile. At least Mr. Jay looked as if he was, even if only sympathetically. "I'm not like you, Mac." It wasn't a put-down. It was a simple statement of fact. But to Mac it felt like a splash of cold water. "I am God. I am who I am. And unlike you, my wings can't be clipped." "Well, that's wonderful for you, but where exactly does that leave me?" Mac blurted out, sounding more irritated than he would have liked. Papa began stroking the little bird, brought him up close to her face, and said, "Smack dab in the center of my love," as the two cuddled nose to beak. "I'm thinking that bird probably understands that better than I do," was the best Mac could offer. "I know, honey, that's why we're here. Why do you think I said, 'I'm not like you'?" "Well, I really have no idea. I mean, you're God and I'm not." He couldn't keep the sarcasm out of his voice, but she ignored it completely. "Yes, but not exactly. At least not in the way you're thinking. Mackenzie, I am what some would say holy, H-O-L-Y, and holy, W-H-O-L-L-Y, other than you. The problem is that many folks try to grasp some sense of who I am by taking the best version of themselves, projecting that to the nth degree, factoring in all the goodness they can perceive, which often isn't much, and then calling that God. And while it may seem like a noble effort, the truth is that it falls pitifully short of who I really am. I'm not merely the best version of you that you can think of. I am far more than that, above and beyond all that you can ask or think. I'm sorry, but those are just words to me. They don't make much sense," Mac shrugged. "Even though you can't finally grasp me, guess what? I still want to be known." "You're talking about Jesus, right? Is this going to be a let's try to understand the Trinity sort of thing?" She chuckled. "Sort of, but this isn't Sunday school. This is a flying lesson. Mackenzie, as you might imagine, there are some advantages to being God. By nature, I am completely unlimited without bounds. I have always known fullness. I live in a state of perpetual satisfaction as my normal state of existence," she said, quite pleased. "Just one of the perks of being me." That made Max smile. The lady was fully enjoying herself, all by herself, and there wasn't an ounce of arrogance to spoil it. "We created you to share in that, but then Adam chose to go it on his own, as we know he would, and everything got messed up. But instead of scrapping the whole creation, we rolled up our sleeves and entered into the middle of the mess. That's what we have done in Jesus." Mac was hanging in there, trying his best to follow her train of thought. "When we three spoke ourselves into human existence as the Son of God, we became fully human. We also chose to embrace all the limitations this entailed. Even though we have always been present in this created universe, we now became flesh and blood. It would be like this bird, whose nature is to fly, choosing only to walk and remain grounded. He doesn't stop being a bird, but it does alter his experience of life significantly." She paused to make sure Mac was still tracking. While there was a definite cramp forming in his brain, he voiced an "okay," inviting her to continue. "Although by nature he is fully God, Jesus is fully human and lives as such. While never losing the innate ability to fly, he chooses moment by moment to remain grounded. That is why his name is Emmanuel, God with us, or God with you, to be more precise. But what about all the miracles, the healings, raising people from the dead? Don't those prove that Jesus was God? You know, more than human." "No, it proves that Jesus is truly human." "What?" "Mackenzie, I can fly, but humans can't. Jesus is fully human. Although he is also fully God, he has never drawn upon his nature as God to do anything. He has only lived out his relationship with me, living in the very same manner that I desire to be in relationship with every human being. He is just the first to do it to the utmost, the first to absolutely trust my life within him, the first to believe in my love and my goodness without regard for appearance or consequence. So when he healed the blind, he did so as a dependent, limited human being, trusting in my life and power to be at work within him and through him. Jesus, as a human being, had no power within himself to heal anyone. That came as a shock to Mac's religious system. Only as he rested in his relationship with me and in our communion, our co-union, could he express my heart and will into any given circumstance. So when you look at Jesus and it appears that he's flying, he really is flying. But what you are actually seeing is me, my life in him. That's how he lives and acts as a true human, how every human is designed to live, out of my life. A bird is defined not by being grounded, but by his ability to fly. Remember this, humans are defined not by their limitations, but by the intentions I have for them. Not by what they seem to be, but by everything it means to be created in my image. Mac felt the onset of information overload, so he pulled up a chair and just sat down. This would take some time to comprehend. So does this mean that you were limited when Jesus was on earth? I mean, did you limit yourself only to Jesus? Not at all. Although I have only been limited in Jesus, I have never been limited in myself. There's that Holy Trinity thing, which is where I kind of get lost. Papa laughed a long, rich belly laugh that made Mac want to join in. She set the little bird down on the table next to Mac, turned to open the oven, and gave the pie that was baking a quick little look. Satisfied that everything was fine, Papa then pulled up a chair alongside him. Mac looked at the little bird, who amazingly was content to just sit there with them. The absurdity of it all gave Mac a chuckle. To begin with, that you can't grasp the wonder of my nature is rather a good thing. Who wants to worship a God who can be fully comprehended, eh? Not much mystery in that. But what difference does it make that there are 3 of you and you are all one God? Did I say that right? Right enough, she grinned. Mackenzie, it makes all the difference in the world. She seemed to be enjoying this. We are not 3 gods, and we are not talking about one God with 3 attitudes, like a man who is a husband, father, and worker. I am one God, and I am 3 persons, and each of the 3 is fully and entirely the one. Yeah, right. The huh? Mac had been suppressing finally surfaced in all its glory. Thank you, Mac. Me too. Never mind that, she continued. What's important is this. If I were simply one God and only one person, then you would find yourself in this creation without something wonderful, without something essential even, and I would be utterly other than I am. And we would be without, Mac didn't even know how to finish the question, love and relationship. All love and relationship is possible for you only because it already exists within me, within God myself. Love is not the limitation. Love is the flying. I am love. As if in response to her declaration, the timer dinged and the little bird took off and flew out the window. Watching the jay in flight took on a whole new level of delight. Mac turned back to Papa and just stared at her in wonder. She was so beautiful and astonishing, and even though he was feeling a little lost, and even though the great sadness still attended him, he felt himself settling down somewhat into the safety of being close to her. You do understand, she continued, that unless I had an object to love, or more accurately, a someone to love, if I did not have such a relationship within myself, then I would not be capable of love at all. You would have a God who could not love. Or maybe worse, you would have a God who, when he chose, could love only as a limitation of his nature. That kind of God could possibly act without love, and that would be a disaster. And that is surely not me. With that, Papa stood up, went to the oven door, pulled out the freshly baked pie, set it on the counter, and turning around as if to present herself, said, "The God who is, the I am who I am, cannot act apart from love." Mac knew that what he was hearing, as hard as it was to understand, was something amazing and incredible. It was as if her words were wrapping themselves around him, embracing him and speaking to him in ways beyond just what he could hear. Not that he actually believed any of it. If only it were true. His experience told him otherwise. This weekend is about relationship and love. Now, I know you have a lot you want to talk to me about, but right now, you'd better go wash up. The other 2 are on their way in for supper. She began to walk away, but paused and turned back. Mackenzie, I know that your heart is full of pain and anger and a lot of confusion. Together, you and I will get around to some of that while you're here. But I also want you to know that there is more going on than you could imagine or understand, even if I told you. As much as you are able, rest in what trust you have in me, no matter how small, okay? Mac had lowered his head and was looking at the floor. She knows, he thought. Small? His little must be barely to the right of none? Nodding agreement, he looked up and noticed again the scars on her wrists. Papa, Mac finally said in a way that felt awkward, but he was trying. Yes, honey? Mac struggled for the words to tell her what was in his heart. I'm so sorry that Jesus had to die. She walked around the table and gave Mac another big hug. I know you are, and thank you. But you need to know that we aren't sorry at all. It was worth it. Isn't that right, son? She turned to ask her question of Jesus, who had just entered the cabin. Absolutely, he paused and then looked at Mac. And I would have done it even if it were only for you. But it wasn't, he said with an inviting grin. Mac excused himself and found the bathroom, where he washed his hands and face and tried to collect himself. We're ready for Chapter 7, which is God on the Dock, but I need to take a little break here. Okay, Colleen?
Okie doke, I was wondering when.
Yeah, I hated to stop in the middle of that stuff because I didn't know where was a good stop.
Yes, and let me see, I'll find that darn thing. Here you go. And it's Guardian Angel with Terry Oldfield.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. righty. We are back.
Oops, I was muted.
Oops.
Did something just happen in the in WSR? Because I think I lost it somewhere.
Well, I know my browser just, I had to refresh the thing, so, and I know that some people have had to clear their cache and all that kind of stuff, so, I don't know.
I did that. I did the C cleaner stuff.
Oh, Annette says she's going to be late again tonight.
Yeah, I saw that. I typed her an answer. It didn't answer, huh?
No.
Seemed like it is having fits here.
Oh, yeah, mine's been doing that too the last couple of days. I'll type something and it won't take.
Uh-huh.
And then I have to refresh the whole thing, and then it accepts my typing, so.
Yeah, I'm not in there at all. I just typed it again.
I say, it says, I figured that, Annette.
Oh, well, see, I don't see that at all.
Take your little bar down. See if that helps.
No, it doesn't help. I mean, I'm fully in there.
Uh-huh.
It's fully on the screen. The whole thing.
Yeah.
But, oh, it just popped in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. Something weird.
Yeah, it's just been weird these last couple days.
I guess so. Well, alrighty then. Let's get back to chapter 7. Let's see if I can make it through the chapter.
It's a very good book. Very good. I'm glad you did.
I'm enjoying it, and I think more people will enjoy it once they listen in the archives.
Yeah.
Because they can listen at their own pace.
Right, and cry and all that stuff with,
Yeah.
But there are, but to me, that's a good book. A book that makes you cry and laugh and brings out those emotions and things.
Yes, tears are a cleansing thing, and it's not bad to do it every once in a while.
Yeah, and touches places in us that we kind of shove to the bottom.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, chapter 7, God on the Dock. Let's pray that the human race never escapes Earth to spread its iniquity elsewhere. C.S. Lewis. Max stood in the bathroom looking into the mirror while wiping his face with a dry towel. He was searching for some sign of insanity in those eyes staring back at him. Was this real? Of course not. It was impossible. But then he reached out his hand and slowly touched the mirror. Maybe this was an hallucination being brought on by all his grief and despair. Maybe it was a dream. Hold on, I have to sneeze.
Bless you.
Holy cow, I was trying to get them muted but the sneeze was coming. Whew. Sorry about that. Maybe it was a dream and he was asleep somewhere. Maybe in the shack, freezing to death. Maybe suddenly a terrible crash broke into his reverie. It came from the direction of the kitchen, and Mac froze. For a moment there was dead silence, and then unexpectedly he heard uproarious laughter. Curious, he exited the bathroom and poked his head through the doorway of the kitchen. Mac was shocked at the scene in front of him. It appeared that Jesus had dropped a large bowl of some sort of batter or sauce on the floor, and it was everywhere. It must have landed close to Papa because the lower portion of her skirt and bare feet were covered in the gooey mess. They were laughing so hard that Mac didn't think they were breathing. Sariu said something about humans being clumsy, and all three started roaring again. Finally, Jesus brushed past Mac and returned a minute later with a large basin of water and towels. Sariu had already started wiping the goop from the floor and cupboards. But Jesus went straight to Papa and, kneeling at her feet, began to wipe off the front of her clothes. He worked down to her feet and gently lifted one foot at a time, which he directed into the basin where he cleaned and massaged it. "Oh, that feels so good," exclaimed Papa as she continued her tasks at the counter. As he leaned against the doorway watching, Mac was full of thoughts. So this was God in relationship. It was beautiful and so appealing. He knew that it didn't matter whose fault it was. The mess from some bowl that had been broken, that a planned dish would not be shared. Obviously, what was truly important here was the love they had for one another and the fullness it brought them. He shook his head. How different this was from the way he sometimes treated the ones he loved. Supper was simple, but a feast nonetheless. Roast bird of some kind in an orangey, mango-y kind of sauce. Fresh vegetables spiced with who but God knew what. All fruity and gingery, tangy and peppery. Rice, the quality of which Mac had never before tasted, could have been a meal by itself. The only awkward part was at the very beginning, when Mac, out of habit, bowed his head before he remembered where he was. He looked up to find the three of them all grinning at him. So as nonchalantly as he could, he said, "Thank you all. Could I have a bit of that rice there?" Sure, we were going to have this incredible Japanese sauce, but Greasy Fingers over there, Papa nodded toward Jesus, decided to see if it would bounce. "Come on now," Jesus responded in mock defense. "My hands were slippery. What can I say?" Papa winked at Mac as she passed him the rice. "You just can't get good help around here." Everyone laughed. Conversation seemed almost normal. Mac was asked about each of the children, except Missy, and he talked about their various struggles and triumphs. When he spoke of his concerns for Kate, the three nodded with concerned expressions, but offered him no counsel or wisdom. He also answered questions about his friends, and Sariu seemed most interested in asking about Nan. Finally, Mac blurted out something that had been bothering him throughout the discussion. "Now here I am telling you about my kids and my friends and about Nan, but you already know everything I am telling you, don't you? You're acting like it's the first time you've heard it." Sariu reached across the table and took his hand. "Mackenzie, remember our conversation earlier about limitation?" "Our conversation?" He glanced over at Papa, who was nodding knowingly. "You can't share with one and not..." I got to sneeze again. Sorry.
Well, bless you again and again and again. This must have been a 3-sneezer.
Phew! Sorry about that. Wow. Sometimes when I get started, I just can't seem to stop. So, let me get situated again. That just takes the wind right out of me.
Well, I blessed you 3 times.
Well, thank you.
I figured it was a 3-sneezer.
Yeah. Okay, where was I? Oh yeah, our conversation.
Yeah.
You can't share with one and not share with us all, Sariu said and smiled. Remember that choosing to stay on the ground is a choice to facilitate a relationship, to honor it. Mackenzie, you do this yourself. You don't play a game or color a picture with a child to show your superiority. Rather, you choose to limit yourself so as to facilitate and honor that relationship. You will even lose a competition to accomplish love. It is not about winning and losing, but about love and respect. So when I am telling you about my children, we have limited ourselves out of respect for you. We are not bringing to mind, as it were, our knowledge of your children. As we are listening to you, it is as if this is the first time we have known about them, and we take great delight in seeing them through your eyes. I like that, reflected Max, sitting back in his chair. Sarayu squeezed his hand and seemed to sit back. I do too. Relationships are never about power, and one way to avoid the will to hold power over another is to choose to limit oneself, to serve. Humans often do this, in touching the infirm and sick, in serving the ones whose minds have left to wander, in relating to the poor and loving the very old and the very young, or even in caring for the other who has assumed a position of power over them. Well spoken, Sarayu, said Papa, her face beaming with pride. I'll take care of the dishes later, but first I would like to have a time of devotion. Mac had to suppress a snicker at the thought of God having devotions. Images of family devotions from his childhood came spilling into his mind, not exactly good memories. Often it was a tedious and boring exercise in coming up with the right answers, or rather the same old answers to the same old Bible story questions, and then trying to stay awake during his father's excruciatingly long prayers. And when his father had been drinking, family devotions devolved into a terrifying minefield where any wrong answer or inadvertent glance could trigger an explosion. He half expected Jesus to pull out a huge old King James Bible. Instead, Jesus reached across the table and took Papa's hands in his, scars now clearly visible on wrists. Max sat transfixed as he watched Jesus kiss his father's hands, and then looked deeply into his father's eyes and finally say, Papa, I loved watching you today as you made yourself fully available to take Mac's pain into yourself, and then give him space to choose his own timing. You honored him, and you honored me. To listen to you whisper love and calm into his heart was truly incredible. What a joy to watch. I love being your son. Although Mac felt as if he were intruding, no one else seemed concerned, and he really had no idea where he would have gone in any case. To be in the presence of such love expressed seemed to dislodge an inner emotional log jam, and while he didn't understand exactly what he felt, it was good. What was he witnessing? Something simple, warm, intimate, genuine. This was holy. Holiness had always been a cold and sterile concept to Mac, but this was neither. Concerned that any movement on his part might shatter the moment, he simply closed his eyes and folded his hands in front of him. Listening intently with his eyes shut, he heard Jesus move his chair. There was a pause before he spoke again. Sarayu, Jesus began softly and tenderly, you wash, I'll dry. Mac's eyes snapped open in time to see the two smiling broadly at each other, picking up the dishes and disappearing into the kitchen. He sat for a few moments, unsure about what to do. Papa had gone somewhere, and now that the other two were busy with dishes, well, it was an easy decision. He picked up silverware and glasses and headed for the kitchen. As soon as he had put them down for Sarayu to wash, Jesus tossed him a dish towel and they both began drying. Sarayu began humming the same evocative tune he'd heard earlier with Papa, and Jesus and Max simply listened as they worked. More than once the melody stirred Max deep inside, knocking again at the door. To him it sounded Gaelic, and he could almost hear breath pipes in accompaniment. But as difficult as it was for Mac to stay and allow his emotions to well up so powerfully, the melody absolutely captured him. If he could just keep listening to her, he would be thrilled to do dishes for the rest of his life. 10 minutes or so later, they were finished. Jesus kissed Sarayu on the cheek, and she disappeared around the corner. Then he then turned and smiled at Mac. "Let's go out on the dock and look at the stars." "What about the others?" Mac asked. "I'm here," replied Jesus. "I'm always here." Mac nodded. This presence of God thing, although hard to grasp, seemed to be steadily penetrating past his mind and into his heart. He let it go at that. "Come on," said Jesus, interrupting Mac's thoughts. "I know you enjoy looking at stars. Want to?" He sounded just like a child full of anticipation and expectancy. "Yeah, I think so," answered Mac, realizing that the last time he had done that was on the ill-fated camping trip with the kids. Maybe it was time to take a few risks. He followed Jesus out the back door. In the waning moments of twilight, Mac could make out the rocky shore of the lake, not overgrown as he remembered, but beautifully kept and picture-perfect. The nearby creek seemed to be humming some sort of musical tune. Protruding about 50 feet into the lake was a dock, and Mac could barely make out 3 canoes tied at intervals along its course. Night was falling quickly, and the distant darkness was already thick with the sounds of crickets and bullfrogs. Jesus took his arm and led him up the path while his eyes adjusted. But already Mac was looking up into a moonless night at the wonder of the emerging stars. They made their way 3/4 of the way up the dock and lay down on their backs looking up. The elevation of this place seemed to magnify the heavens, and Mac reveled in seeing stars in such numbers and clarity. Jesus suggested that they close their eyes for a few minutes, allowing the last effects of dusk to disappear for the night. Mac complied, and when he finally opened his eyes, the sight was so powerful that he experienced vertigo for a few seconds. He almost felt as if he were falling up into space, the stars racing toward him as if to embrace him. He lifted his hands, imagining that he could reach out and pluck diamonds, one by one, off a velvety black sky. "Wow," he whispered. "Incredible," whispered Jesus, his head near Mac's in the darkness. "I never get tired of this." "Even though you created it?" Mac asked. "I created it as the Word, before the Word became flesh. So even though I created this, I see it now as a human, and I must say it is impressive." It certainly is. Mac was not sure how to describe what he felt, but as they continued to lie in silence, gazing into the celestial display, watching and listening, he knew in his heart that this too was holy. As they both watched in awestruck wonder, a shooting star would occasionally blaze a brief trail across the night blackness, causing one or the other to exclaim, "Did you see that? Awesome!" After a particularly long silence, Mac spoke. "I feel more comfortable around you. You seem so different from the other two." "How do you mean different?" came his soft voice out of the darkness. "Well," Mac paused as he thought about it. "More real or tangible. I don't know." He struggled with the words, and Jesus lay quietly waiting. "It's like I've always known you. But Papa isn't at all what I expected from God. And Sarayu, she's way out there." Jesus chuckled in the dark. "Since I am human, we have much in common to begin with." "But I still don't understand," Max said. "I am the best way any human can relate to Papa or Sarayu. To see me is to see them. The love you sense from me is no different from how they love you. And believe me, Papa and Sarayu are just as real as I am, though, as you've seen, in far different ways. Speaking of Sarayu, is she the Holy Spirit? Yes, she is creativity. She is action. She is the breathing of life. She is much more. She is my spirit. And her name, Sarayu? Max asked. That is a simple name from one of our human languages. It means wind, a common wind, actually. She loves that name. Grunted Mac. Nothing too common about her. True that, responded Jesus. And the name Papa mentioned Eloise. Oh, Eloisia.
Eloisia?
Yeah, but I'm trying to get Elo. That word. The voice said reverently from the dark next to him. That is a wonderful name. El is my name as Creator God. But Oisia is being, or that which is truly real. So the name means the Creator God who is truly real and the ground of all being. Now that is also a beautiful name. There was silence for a minute while Mac pondered what Jesus had said. So then, where does that leave us? He felt as if he were asking the question for the entire human race. Right where you were always intended to be, in the very center of our love and our purpose. Again a pause. Then, I suppose I can live with that, Max said. Jesus chuckled. I am glad to hear that, he said, and they both laughed. Neither spoke for a time. Stillness had fallen like a blanket, and all Mac was really aware of was the sound of water lapping up against the dock. It was he who eventually broke the silence again. Jesus? Yes, Mackenzie? I am surprised by one thing about you. Really? What? I guess I expected you to be more... Be careful here, Mac. Mac was thinking that to himself. Well, humanly striking. Oh, I see why he was being careful with his thought. Jesus chuckled. Humanly striking? You mean handsome? Now he was laughing. Well, I was trying to avoid that, but yes. Somehow I thought you'd be the ideal man. You know, athletic and overwhelmingly good-looking. It's my nose, isn't it? Mac didn't know what to say. Jesus laughed. I am Jewish, you know. My grandfather on my mother's side had a big nose. In fact, most of the men on my mom's side had big noses. I just thought you'd be better looking. By whose standards? Anyway, once you really get to know me, it won't matter to you. The words, though delivered kindly, stung. Stung what, exactly? Mac lay there a few seconds and realized that as much as he thought he knew Jesus, perhaps he didn't. Not really. Maybe what he knew was an icon, an ideal, an image through which he tried to grasp a sense of spirituality, but not a real person. Why is that? He finally asked. You said if I really knew you, it wouldn't matter and what you looked like. It is quite simple, really. Being always transcends appearance, that which only seems to be. Once you begin to know that being behind the very pretty or very ugly face is determined by your bias, the surface appearances fade away until they simply no longer matter. That is what Eloisia is such a wonderful, that is why Eloisia is such a wonderful name. God, who is the ground of all being, dwells in, around, and through all things, ultimately emerging as the real, and any appearances that mask that reality will fall away. Silence followed as Mac wrestled with what Jesus had said. He gave up after only a minute or two and decided to ask the riskier question. You said I don't really know you. It would be a lot easier if we could always talk like this. Admittedly, Mac, this is special. You were really stuck, and we wanted to help you crawl out of your pain. But don't think that just because I'm not visible, our relationship has to be less real. It will be different, but perhaps even more real. How is that? My purpose from beginning was to live in you and you in me. Wait a minute. How can that happen? If you're still fully human, how can you be inside me? Astounding, isn't it? It's Papa's miracle. It is the power of Sarayu, my spirit, the Spirit of God who restores the union that was lost so long ago. Me, I choose to live moment by moment, fully human. I am fully God, but I am human to the core. Like I said, it's Papa's miracle. Mac was lying in the darkness, listening intently. Are you talking about a real indwelling, not just some positional, theological thing? Of course, answered Jesus, his voice strong and sure. It's what everything is about. The human, formed out of the physical material of creation, can once more be fully indwelt by spiritual life, my life. It requires that a very real dynamic and active union exists. That is almost unbelievable, Mac exclaimed quietly. I had no idea. I need to think more about this, but I might have a lot more questions. And we have your lifetime to sort through them, Jesus chuckled. But enough of that for now. Let's get lost again in the starry night. In the silence that followed, Mac simply lay still, allowing the immensity of space and scattered light to dwarf him, letting his perceptions be captured by starlight and the thought that everything was about him, about the human race, and that all this was all for us. After what seemed like a long time, it was Jesus who broke into the quiet. I'll never get tired of looking at this. The wonder of it all, the wastefulness of creation, as one of our brothers has called it. So elegant, so full of longing and beauty even now. You know, Mac responded, suddenly struck anew by the absurdity of the situation. Where he was, the person next to him, sometimes you sound so, here I am, lying next to God Almighty, and you really sound so human, Jesus offered, but ugly. And with that he began to chuckle, quietly and restrained at first. But after a couple of snorts, laughter simply started tumbling out. It was infectious, and Mac found himself swept along from somewhere deep inside. He had not laughed from down there in a long time. Jesus reached over and hugged him, shaking from his own spasms of mirth, and Mac felt more clean and alive and well than he had since. Well, he couldn't remember when. Eventually they both calmed again, and the night's quiet asserted itself once more. It seemed that even the frogs had called it quits. Mac lay there realizing that he was now feeling guilty about enjoying himself, about laughing, and even in the darkness he could feel the great sadness roll in and over him. Jesus, he whispered as his voice choked, I feel so lost. A hand reached out and squeezed his and didn't let go. I know, Mac, but it's not true. I am with you and I am not lost. I'm sorry it feels that way, but hear me clearly. You are not lost. I hope you're right, Max said, his tension lessened by the words of his newfound friend. Come on, said Jesus, standing up and reaching down for Mac. You have a big day ahead of you. Let's get you to bed. He put his arm around Mac's shoulders, and together they walked back to the cabin. Mac was suddenly exhausted. Today had been one long day. Maybe he would wake up at home in his own bed after a night of vivid dreaming, but somewhere inside he hoped he was wrong. So, next week we will start with Chapter 8, which is titled A Breakfast of Champions.
A Breakfast of Champions?
Yes.
Ah.
Yes. At least we left it at a more comfortable spot this week than we did last week.
Yeah.
This one is too long for me to try to start reading.
Well, we need to talk about the cards.
Oh, yeah, the card. You want to do it this time?
We just did low, right?
Uh-huh.
So now we're going to do high. Okay. I've got it in my head. Sending it out.
Oops. High card. Okay, doke. I'm writing it down right now. I won't ask you. I was tempted to say, is it red or black? Well, duh, Dolly. All right. I wonder if hey.
It showed it was coming through at Skype. It was apparently not going out, even though my butt was showing that it was. So anything going over Skype is apparently recording. I don't know. We'll see. Dang it. Because, like I said, all of my indicators were showing it was fine, but they said it wasn't. They weren't hearing anything.
Yeah, and I was having great difficulties with mine earlier when I was telling you. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how long that was going on until I noticed it.
Well, I don't know. Who the heck knows these days? Like I said, I don't think it's the equipment. I don't think it's my internet or anything like that. I think it's from what I'm hearing from everybody, because Vanessa was having trouble.
Uh-huh.
Dottie was having some issues.
And that had issues, but see, Annette's internet could have been Frontier. It's hard to tell there.
Yeah. And was, so that's what, Texas, Florida, New Jersey, and Indiana, and Pennsylvania, maybe?
See, Ray just said he got back on just now.
So, apparently it's like an all-over sort of thing.
Yeah, it must be. So it wasn't you personally out there, it was just an overall thingy. Sorry about that. We couldn't help it.
Yeah, my server's not up yet. It's going to take 13 more seconds, it says.
And your server does what?
The server is my stream, Haggy Shack Radio stream, because I have my own. So that takes whatever is being played out into the airwaves, basically.
Mm-hmm. So they weren't hearing us for...
Apparently not, although the Wolf Spirit mainstream, because I send my signal, basically, to Wolf Spirit so that it plays on that player as well. It's showing that everything's fine.
And it wasn't, because I wasn't getting it.
Well, I know, and that's what's really weird, and I just refreshed it.
Uh-huh.
And it shows that it's playing.
Says that we're breaking up. Vanessa says we're breaking up, Scotty.
Well, carapala.
I hope it gets fixed before. What's next? Is next Walt and Nancy?
No, next is a replay of Barbara Three Crows because she's still ill and can't read, so it's
I'm sorry she's ill.
It's going to be a replay, and then I'm going to do Annette's because I got a 1 hour slot that's open that we usually do a producer's choice, so I've got to replay Annette. And then after that is the Cosmic Reality Radio Show with Nancy and Walt.
And that's at 7?
Yes.
Okay, just so I get it in my head. Because I have to go to the couch.
Oh, yeah. So I don't know, Dolly, how much of that they heard, but hopefully it all recorded. Because at least it's showing that it did, and it's showing that it's been up for the last 6 hours.
Oh, well, hopefully it recorded so I don't have to redo anything.
Wow. It's still showing server status offline, but it's showing that one as being online, so that's just freaky deaky. Anyway, we'll just go ahead and cut this one off now because it's like 4:01, even though we got started late.
Yeah.
And I'll try to reboot everything and to see if that'll help. Or it could be my whole radio stream is down, which, if that's the case, I'll have to try to figure something else out.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, Colleen.
You're welcome, hon. Love you.
Love you, too. Love you all out there. Thank you for coming. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.